Hello and welcome to Mind, Body, Sleep, the podcast for anyone out there who wants to understand and recover from insomnia using a holistic perspective. I'm Beth Kendall, your host. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show today. I'm so glad you're here. This week's topic on sleep meds, I think, is a widely relatable one, and it's something that I struggled with quite a bit during my own journey through insomnia. So it's something I wanted to talk about on the podcast. Now, I want to do a double disclaimer right away that I am not a medical doctor and nothing that I say should be taken as medical advice or medication advice. So do always consult with your physician around any decisions you make about medications. In today's episode, I want to first share a little about my own experience with sleep meds, as well as the perspective the Mind, Body, Sleep mentorship takes on medications during insomnia recovery. Then I'm going to talk about where I think the real conflict lies when we're talking about medications and why it's often a little more nuanced than we think. And lastly, I'm going to share what finally helped me get off the medication merry-go-round and how the experience changed my personal beliefs about medication in general. Now, the first thing I want to say about medications is that the Mind, Body, Sleep mentorship is a medication neutral program, meaning it doesn't matter if you are taking medications or not taking medications, your ability to recover from insomnia is the same. I have seen so many people recover from insomnia regardless of med status that at this point, I don't see it having any real bearing on the ability to recover. So if this is something that you've been worried about, I personally haven't seen it be a significant factor in the recovery process. Now, my own journey with sleep meds was really fraught with a tremendous amount of inner struggle and conflict. I hated medications, but I also needed medications. And it was this feeling and this fear that I was going to be chained to them for the rest of my life that caused me a lot of suffering. I worried a lot about long-term side effects. And I think what scared me the most was this fear that I was going to run out of meds that actually worked, because everything seemed to stop working eventually. And then I'd be back at square one, scrambling to put together all of these crazy combos and supplements. And I was always worried that my doctor was going to cut me off or there'd be no more meds left on the market for me to try. And I just hated that I was reliant on meds. And the stakes just got higher and higher over time, which I don't think is ever a great feeling. And, I just had a very stoic nature around the use of meds in general. I felt like they represented a weakness in me personally, and I wasn't just stoic about sleep meds. I was pretty opposed to all meds and would often equate not succumbing to something as basic as an Advil, even after having a horrible headache for hours, as a sort of win, right? A personal victory. And I prided myself on being able to tough things out without relying on medication. And this comes from a lot of the hyper-independence patterns I developed in early life, along with the no pain, no gain mindset that was very much built into my psyche as a young girl growing up in the ballet world. So to be in the situation I was in with sleep meds was really hard on me. And I felt like I was failing at this very basic thing that everyone else seemed to be able to do no problem. And even with meds, sleep often wasn't great. So I was basically just limping along year after year, trying to get relief where I could. But here's the thing that's so mind-bendy about medications. The significance of the medication isn't so much on the medication itself. It's what we believe about the medication and our perception of the role it plays in our life that dictates our experience of it. Medication itself is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. I've seen it be helpful. I've seen it be not so helpful. It's our thoughts about medication and our mind's interpretation of what it means about us that informs how we experience it. And I can give you a really good example of this using my parents. So my mom takes sleep meds every night and has for years, and it's not a problem. She's very glad that these meds exist, and there's no worry or guilt about what it means about her or her sleep. And she's not forecasting a time in her life where they'll no longer work or her doctor's going to cut her off. And even if they did stop working, she would just figure it out or use a different sleep med. So basically, there's no inner conflict for her around taking meds. And of course, as a flight attendant, I saw this many times in the airline industry. People were very glad to have the help of a sleep med to deal with all the crazy schedules. And generally speaking, there wasn't any guilt or shame about this. Now, my dad would also periodically take sleep meds, and I don't think he does at all anymore because he had insomnia and recovered from it watching my curriculum videos while I was creating Mind, Body, Sleep a while back, which is pretty cool. But when he did take sleep meds, there was a lot more inner conflict about it. He just didn't like that he had to take them, and he would often ration them out ahead of time or rotate them or plan ahead. And I think they made him really groggy the next day. So the idea of taking meds for him just didn't resonate, even if it was only occasionally. So these are two very different experiences of sleep meds with two people who live in the same environment. So in the context of insomnia, most of the struggle that I see from sleep meds comes from our perception of the meds more than the meds themselves. And this is where it can be really helpful to work with a coach, because even though we can't give medication advice, we can help you move through the experience of taking meds and coming off of meds with a lot more ease and grace. And this became so clear to me during my personal journey because my own beliefs about meds and the role they played in my life changed pretty dramatically. I was much more like my dad for most of my life and then became much more like my mom post-insomnia. So let me talk a little bit about how the tables turned with sleep meds. Once I understood what I was dealing with when it came to insomnia, I had a pretty big immediate shift. My sleep didn't get better for a while, but my thinking about it changed pretty quickly. Understanding that my mind had created a negative association with not sleeping helped me also recognize that all of the thoughts, beliefs, and eventual identity I created from that association weren't really true. So with that realization, meds took on a much different role in my life. It was like suddenly they weren't something that was going to be my forever situation. They were something that was actually going to prove useful on my way out of insomnia. My mind's interpretation of taking sleep meds just completely changed. Now, I've talked quite a bit about my recovery process on the podcast, but meds ended up being something that I used off and on for about a year, even after I understood what I was dealing with. And I was much more okay with that than I was before because I no longer believed my fear. I understood that there had never been anything inherently wrong with my ability to sleep. My mind had just been running this belief system for 42 years. And even though my sleep didn't really come online right away, this also wasn't concerning to me because I had already recovered my physical health after being down with Lyme disease for many years. And that all started with thinking and approaching health differently before it manifested in realized health. And so for me, medication became a part of the recovery process versus this ball and chain that I was stuck with for the rest of my life. And it was amazing how much better they worked from that vantage point because all of the inner conflict and worrying and forecasting and analyzing and researching just came to a halt, right? I wasn't adding fuel to the fire anymore. So I took meds when I really needed them or when hyperarousal was really high. There were times during speed bumps that I needed to be functional or I just wanted to be able to enjoy my life without feeling like a zombie. So I took meds. I no longer identified with the idea that pain was the only path to gain, especially when it came to something as simple as sleep. And I was just so much more laid back in general about the whole thing. And that ended up being what really helped me the most. Because the whole paradoxical thing in all of this is that when I gave myself permission to take meds, that lifted all of the judgment and pressure off the situation. And it was in that freedom that I intuitively knew when I didn't need to take them anymore. And that's how I eventually got off of them. There was no deadline, no timeline, no goal, no fear, no pressure. I was just far enough away from the fear that hyperarousal didn't overwhelm me anymore. And I just didn't feel like I needed the help. And that has transferred over in some ways to other meds. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm a super big fan of pharma and just automatically taking meds for everything, because that is not at all the case. I think it's absolutely bananas that we have pharmaceutical commercials here in the US. And I think it just primes our brains to accept labels and automatically look for solutions outside ourselves. But I have made peace with things like taking an Advil. Okay. My cost benefit analysis of certain situations has changed, meaning I see more value in taking an Advil than I do sitting with a headache for 6 hours and missing out on the enjoyment of life. So I've become much more tempered and moderate at this stage in my life. So I hope that something here was useful for you today. I want to give a big, huge thank you to those of you who have left a rating or review for the podcast. If you're struggling with your sleep or you're worried about your sleep right now, just remember that everything you need to sleep is already within you. I'm Beth Kendall, and this is the Mind, Body, Sleep podcast. I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here today. If you love what you heard on today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast. And if you need more support with your sleep, join me in the Mind, Body, Sleep Mentorship. This 3-month one-on-one program will transform your relationship with sleep so you can get back to living the life that you love, free from the fear of not sleeping. Head on over to bethkendall.com for more details. I'll see you next time.